Greetings to those who would dare engage Apollyon. Before we begin, I believe that I said we were reading chapter 9 last week. Chapter 9 is this week, and chapter 8 was last week. We read the right chapter. I just called it the wrong thing. Please forgive me. So we are still on track, and I apologize for any confusion if you were flipping trying to find out where I was at. Hopefully they're delineated the same way. I've looked at a couple of copies, and they seem to be broken up different places by different people, and also depends on whether you're reading the modern English or the older version, which we're reading, the original. This week is one of the hardest chapters in the book. When I would read this chapter to the children, I would always get choked up at this point, because I too remember the battle with Apollyon, and just like Christian in today's story, I too lost hold of my sword for a moment. The kids would look at me with concern when I would start getting choked up reading this section. What is Dad getting so choked up about would be the look on their little faces. I remember thanking God that they hadn't had to face Apollyon yet. But then a shiver would go down my spine, realizing that if they were going to go to the celestial city, then they too must face Apollyon at some point in their lives. That is what makes The Pilgrim's Progress such a time-honored classic. It is the story of each of us. It is the story of all of our spiritual journeys. While perhaps one of the most simple analogies a person could run into as far as books go, it has the spiritual depth of an ocean. The book leaves no room for advanced interpretation. You do not have to sit and wonder why a worldly wise man is named Worldly Wise Man, nor do you have to spend much time figuring out why a particular place is named Vainglory. And yet, within the simplistic narrative and the simplistic style, one finds the advanced spiritual journey that we all must take if we are to enter the celestial city. Ephesians 6 tells us the following: Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up your shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Christian's journey begins with the Bible and the evangelist informing good Christian, whose name, if you remember, was Graceless prior to his conversion, that he was living in a land of destruction and that the only way out was through the wicket gate and past a cross. But as Christian's journey takes him further and further away from the city of destruction, so do his journeys also shift his view from the physical world to the spiritual world. In the book, spiritual growth is indicated in how accustomed and how much faith Christian puts into his gifts that were given to him by the three glowing ones earlier in the story. In our lives, our shift from the physical to the spiritual also comes when we learn how to wield and trust in our gifts from the Spirit, from the glowing ones. Notice that Christian has the armor, but it is only when he must put his armor into practice that he learns that it is useless for retreat. It has no covering for the back. He also learns how to better use his sword, but only after he has dropped his sword. So many Christians turn or remain stagnant at the first sign of real battle. And yet it is through the real battle that spiritual growth lives, survives, and grows. Look at every line of the Ephesians chapter 6 that we just read and ask yourself if it leaves room for a physical factor to guide us, heal us, protect us, and give us power to fight the good fight, or is it all spiritual? There are things that take place in the physical plane. But the spiritual realities are much more real, substantial, and meaningful than the realm we view through a glass darkly. The spiritual realm is determinative. Paul tells the Corinthians, love never fails. Love takes place in the spiritual. You can't see love, but you know love. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. The transition from physical to spiritual. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Paul equates spiritual awareness with maturity. And it is not it's not as easy a step as you would think. Many times when talking to people or giving people pastorly advice, I will discuss the physical nature of things with people just long enough to let them know that I do indeed hear them. But then I switch gears to the spiritual world. For some, hopefully for all, it is a breath of fresh air, an empowering breath of fresh air. For others, it seems to them that I'm avoiding the issue or that I'm giving them some kind of untested spiritual mumbo jumbo. They do not want to believe that depression could have a spiritual root. They do not want their marriage issues to have a spiritual undercurrent. For if the spirit world must be engaged for true healing and true power to take place, then certain confessions about our nature, our sinful state, and our responsibility must be made, and painful truths must be brought out, kicking and screaming into the light to either die or be embraced. In other words, TV, video games, and pizza on demand are all back in the city of destruction, while the road ahead has a sign on the map that does indeed indicate, here there be dragons. And have no doubt, anyone who would switch their worldview from physical and materialistic to spiritual and transcendent must engage Apollyon at some point in their spiritual journey. Looking back at the times that I would read this to my children, I realize now that though my heart aches at the thought of my children having to face the dragon, there is absolutely nothing I would do to save them from the fight. I would prepare them for the fight. For when they have vanquished the beast through the use of the sword of truth, they will have learned something that we cannot learn any other way, nothing I can pass down to them in word, thought, or deed. They must learn it on their own, that our weapons are indeed sufficient, that our sword of the word is indeed capable, and that through the blood of Calvary our courage has indeed been tempered like steel. And most of all, those that journey to the celestial city are ultimately protected, guarded, and equipped by the king and the ruler of that fair land, if we'll have trust in his plan and his purposes. All right. Chapter 8 was last week. Chapter 9 this week. And neither a short nor a long one. A nice medium one this week. But now in this valley of humiliation, poor Christian was hard put to it, for he had gone but a little way before he espied a foul fiend coming over the field to meet him. His name is Apollyon. Then did Christian begin to be afraid and to cast in his mind whether to go back or to stand his ground. But he considered again that he had no armor for his back, and therefore thought that to turn the back to him might give him greater advantage with ease to pierce him with his darts. Therefore he resolved to venture and stand his ground. For, thought he, had I no more in my eye than the saving of my life, it would be the best way to stand. So he went on, and Apollyon met him. Now the monster was hideous to behold. He was clothed with scales like a fish, and they are his pride. And he had wings like a dragon, feet like a bear, and out of his belly came fire and smoke, and his mouth was as the mouth of a lion. When he came up to Christian, he beheld him with a disdainful countenance, and thus began to question him. Whence come you, and whither are you bound? I am come from the city of destruction, which is the place of all evil, and I am going to the city of Zion. By this I perceive that thou art one of my subjects, for all that country is mine, and I am the prince and God of it. How is it, then, that thou hast run away from thy king? Were it not that I hope thou mayest do me more service, I would strike thee now at one blow to the ground. I was indeed born in your domains, but your service was hard, and your wages such as a man could not live on, for the wages of sin is death. Therefore, when I was come to years, I did, as other considerate persons do, look out if perhaps I might mend myself. There is no prince that will thus lightly lose his subjects, neither will I as yet lose thee. But since thou complainest of thy service and wages, be content to go back. What our country will afford, I do here promise to give thee. But I have let myself to another, even to the king and of princes, and how can I with fairness go back with thee? Thou hast done in this according to the proverb, changed a bad for a worse. But it is ordinary for those that have professed themselves his servants, after a while to give him the slip and return again to me. Do thou so too, and all shall be well. I have given him my faith, and sworn my allegiance to him. How then can I go back from this and not be hanged as a traitor? Thou didst the same by me, and yet I am willing to pass by all, if now thou wilt yet turn again and go back. What I promised thee was in my non-age, and besides I count that the prince under whose banner now I stand is able to absolve me, yea, and to pardon also what I did as to my compliance with thee. And besides, O thou destroying Apollyon, to speak truth, I like his service, his wages, his servants, his government, his company, and country better than thine. Therefore leave off to persuade me further. I am his servant, and I will follow him. Consider again, when thou art in cool blood, what thou art like to meet with in the way that thou goest. Thou knowest that, for the most part, his servants come to an ill end, because they are transgressors against me and my ways. How many of them have been put to shameful deaths? And besides, thou countest his service better than mine, whereas he never yet came from the place where he is to deliver any that served him out of their hands. But as for me, how many times, as all the world very well knows, have I delivered either by power or fraud those that have faithfully served me from him and his, though taken by them, and so will I deliver thee. His forbearing at present to deliver them is on purpose to try their love, whether they will cleave to him to the end. And as for the ill end thou sayest they come to, that is most glorious in their account. For present deliverance they do not much expect it, for they stay for their glory, and then they shall have it, when their prince comes in his and the glory of the angels. Thou hast already been unfaithful in thy service to him, and how dost thou think to receive wages of him? Wherein, O Apollyon, have I been unfaithful to him? Thou didst faint at first setting out, when thou wast almost choked in the slough of despond. Thou didst attempt wrong ways to get rid of thy burden, whereas thou shouldest have stayed till thy prince had taken it off. Thou didst sinfully sleep, and lose thy choice things. Thou wast also almost persuaded to go back at the sight of the lions. And when thou talkest of thy journey and what thou hast heard and seen, thou art inwardly desirous of vainglory in all that thou sayest or doest. All this is true, and much more which thou hast left out. But the prince whom I serve and honor is merciful and ready to forgive. But besides these infirmities possessed me in thy country, for there I sucked them in, and have groaned under them, been sorry for them, and have obtained pardon of my prince. Then Apollyon broke out into a grievous rage, saying, I am an enemy to this prince. I hate his person, his laws, and people, and am come out on purpose to withstand thee. Apollyon, beware what you do, for I am in the king's highway, the way of holiness, therefore take heed to yourself. Then Apollyon straddled quite over the whole breadth of the way, and said, I am void of fear in this matter. Prepare thyself to die, for I swear by in my infernal den that thou shalt go no farther. Here will I spill thy soul. And with that he threw a flaming dart at his breast. But Christian had a shield in his hand with which he caught it, and so prevented the danger of that. Then did Christian draw, for he saw it was time to bestir him. And Apollyon, as fast made at him, throwing darts as thick as hail, by which notwithstanding all that Christian could do to avoid it, Apollyon wounded him in the head, his hand and foot. This made Christian give a little back. Apollyon therefore followed his work amain, and Christian again took courage and resisted as manfully as he could. This sore combat lasted for above half a day, even till Christian was almost quite spent. For you must know that Christian, by reason of his wounds, must needs grow weaker. Then Apollyon, espying his opportunity, began to gather up close to Christian, and wrestling with him, gave him a dreadful fall, and with that Christian's sword flew out of his hand. Then said Apollyon, I am sure of thee now, and with that he had almost pressed him to death, so that Christian began to despair of life. But as God would have it, while Apollyon was fetching of his last blow, thereby to make a full end of this good man, Christian nimbly stretched out his hand for his sword, and caught it, saying, Rejoice not against me, O mine enemy. When I fall, I shall arise. And with that he gave him a deadly thrust, which made him give back as one that had received his mortal wound. Christian, perceiving that, made at him again, saying, Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. And with that Apollyon spread forth his dragon wings, and sped him away, that Christian saw him no more. In this combat, no man can imagine, unless he had seen and heard as I did, what yelling and hideous roaring Apollyon made all the time of the fight. He spake like a dragon, and on the other side what sighs and groans burst from Christian's heart. I never saw him all the while give so much as one pleasant look, till he perceived he had wounded Apollyon with his two-edged sword. Then indeed he did smile and look upward, but it was the dreadfulest sight that ever I saw. So when the battle was over, Christian said, I will here give thanks to him that hath delivered me out of the mouth of the lion, to him that did help me against Apollyon. And so he did, saying, Great Beelzebub, the captain of the fiend, designed my ruin. Therefore to this end he sent him harnessed out, and he with rage that hellish was did fiercely me engage. But blessed Michael helped me, and I by dint of sword did quickly make him fly. Therefore to him let me give lasting praise and thanks, and bless his holy name always. Then there came to him a hand with some of the leaves of the tree of life, that the which Christian took and applied to the wounds that he had received in the battle, and was healed immediately. He also sat down in that place to eat bread and to drink of the bottle that was given him a little before. So being refreshed, he addressed himself to his journey with his sword drawn in his hand, for he said, I know not but some other enemy may be at hand. But he met with no other affront from Apollyon quite through this valley. Now, at the end of this valley was another called Valley of the Shadow of Death. And Christian must needs go through it, because the way to the celestial city lay through the midst of it. Now this valley is a very solitary place. The prophet Jeremiah thus describes it: a wilderness, a land of deserts and of pits, a land of drought and of the shadow of death, a land that no man but a Christian passeth through, and where no man dwelt. Micah 7:8 says, Do not gloat over me, my enemy. Though I have fallen, I will rise. Though I sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light. Is the Lord your light? I hope so. God bless, and Godspeed.